Hi, this is Sarit Switzer, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast, a podcast devoted to the teachings of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi as recorded in his most famous work, the Tanya. My hope for this show is to make these teachings accessible and relatable to the average person, regardless of prior Jewish education or affiliation. The episodes follow the prescribed daily study portions and are meant to serve as practical lessons in how to live your life as your true self and develop an authentic and powerful relationship with your Creator. I have personally experienced the effects the study of this work has had on me, and I'm excited to share what I can of this knowledge with you. So please join me on this journey of learning, self-growth, and connection with your source. Hi, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast. This is episode 376 for the 9th of Kislev in a leap year. The holiday of Hanukkah is coming up, which is perhaps the reason why it came to mind when I was researching today's episode and thinking about how to give it over. So the interesting thing about the holiday of Hanukkah is, there's that famous joke that every Jewish holiday is pretty much the same. They tried to kill us, we won, let's eat, right? So in the story of Hanukkah, it's actually pretty interesting because on first glance, if you actually get into the details, the Greeks were not actually as vicious as some of the other catastrophes that we've suffered in our history, unfortunately. For example, in the story of Purim, then there was a decree to kill all Jews if they didn't bow down to Haman. Or we know more recently in the Holocaust, there was a decree to kill anybody with Jewish ancestry, right? Like really harsh. But in the story of Hanukkah, they actually weren't as brutal on first glance. The goal wasn't to annihilate all Jews, just to, kill all Jews without rhyme and reason and all that stuff. And they didn't even necessarily want that all Jews should convert to their religion. They were okay with Jews being Jewish. The problem that they had was with God. So as we know that many philosophies and many big thinkers have come out of Greece. Greek philosophy is sort of like the foundation of a lot of philosophical schools that are popular till today. So the Greeks prided themselves on being very intellectually minded and very into human capabilities. There was like this worship of the body, the worship of the human minds and things like that. Even the Greek gods were all very humanized. And so the main issue that these Greeks had with the Jews is the insistence that their religion, quote unquote, was not just another religion of philosophy like all the other religions and philosophies of the world, but the Jewish insistence on the fact that our religion, our faith is divine, that it's godly, which is why the main mitzvahs that the Greeks had issue with were those which are known as chukim, which is those mitzvahs which have no rhyme or reason for them. We just do them because God tells us to do them. An example of this is the bris, for example, is a circumcision. There's no real explanation as to why we do a bris. We just do it because God says that we should do it. The Greeks didn't even have a problem with us learning Torah, so long as we learn this Torah is the same way that we would learn any other kind of philosophy, that we saw it as like a man-made philosophy. But to say that the Torah is divine in nature, that's something that the Greeks had a problem with. So this brings us to our discussion today. And the topic of today's discussion in the Tanya, which is we're still in that big essay found in Kuntres Acharon, essay 4 of Kuntres Acharon. We're going to be discussing how studying Torah, even studying those parts of Torah that are not immediately practical to us, the laws of the Torah that are really very theoretical in nature, actually is a divine process, and it actually does connect us with divinity in a way that our own intellects, in a way that our own emotions cannot. When we're talking about self-generated emotions or intellect, even if those self-generated emotions or intellect are directed towards God, and we're trying to cultivate a sense of love and fear of God, like we are encouraged to do. Nevertheless, the self-cultivation of these emotions can only take us so far, because the human intellect and the human heart is limited. It's subjective. We're creations like everything else. And this is what the Greeks fail to understand, is that we are creations, just like even angels are creations. And creations are by nature separate from God. Versus when it comes to Torah is not a creation like everything else. Torah is divine. Torah is divine wisdom, which is not diluted in the same sense as everything else is. So when we learn Torah, we're actually tapping into divinity in a much more pure form than we could when we just stay with our own intellectual and emotionally generated feelings that we can have. So the springboard for this discussion is actually the cliffhanger, which we were left on in yesterday's episode. So you can go back and listen to that if you need a review. Where yesterday we started talking about this idea of learning Torah and about the great effect learning Torah can have, especially if we learn about the mitzvahs. So because we learned about we've been discussing this whole idea of the great power that happens when we perform mitzvahs using physical objects. And then we spoke about how even if we don't actually perform the mitzvahs, but even just the mere learning about these physical mitzvahs, it can have a very similar effect. But the end of yesterday's section left us with a question where the Alter Rebbe said that while this logic seems to ring true when it comes to the positive commandments, like when we learn about positive commandments that we intend to perform, okay, so we're learning about it even if we're not performing it in the moment, so it makes sense that it would have a similar effect. But what about learning about the prohibitions, especially if we learn about the prohibitions that have zero applicability to us? We know that we're never going to encounter them. They're just not practical for our lives. How do these create a similar effect? And if so, how does this happen? And so now this is where we begin today. So today the Alter Rebbe says that there's actually something that they all have in common, whether we're learning about the positive laws or the negative prohibitions of the Torah. So what is it? So first, we're going to contrast this with love and fear. And we're going to talk about intellectually generated love and fear. So the intellectually generated love and fear of the angels is in an aspect of creation, ex nihilo. And to be specific, we can say that it's an aspect of the nefesh and the ruach of the worlds of Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiyah, which if you've been following along, then the Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiyah, these are the three lower worlds, and these are the worlds where creation happens, which contrasts with Atzilus, which is the world of emanation. So there's a disconnect between the world of Atzilus and the three lower worlds. So the Alter Rebbe is saying that the world of angels, which we think of as very, very high and lofty, and yes, the angels love and fear God very much, yet they are found within this world, these worlds of Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiyah. That's the realm they're in. So thus, they're considered to be creations of God. They're something separate from God. But when we talk about the details of the halachas, by contrast, these are the drawing down of the supernal chokhmah of the emanator himself, which becomes vested within physicality. And this is very different than the type of vestment that happens when the supernal wisdom becomes vested within the intellectually generated love and fear. Why? Because when God's supernal chokhmah becomes vested within intellectually generated love and fear of God, this vestment is a type of vestment that totally conceals God. And it's likened to the type of concealment that is found here in this physical earth that we live in comparison to the supernal wisdom that's found within it. As it is written, Kulam b'chokhmah asita, you made all with wisdom. That's from Tehillim chapter 104, verse 24. So basically, just to explain that a little bit. So we know that everything in the world was created through Chokhmah. Chokhmah is the source of all of creation. We've spoken about this many times in the Tanya. However, here we are in this physical reality. The Chokhmah is not apparent here. It's very, very, very much concealed. And it's concealed so much to the point that it's concealed in such a way that the way it's explained in Hasidic terminology, as the Alter Rebbe explains it here, is it's the chitzonius of the kelim of Malchus of Atzilus that is in the world of Asiyah. So it's very technical, but basically it's the external level of the vessels of Malchus of Atzilus as it's found in Asiyah, which basically what this translates to mean is that it's totally, totally concealed in the level of the Ruach and the Nefesh, which are the two lower levels of the soul of Asiya, of the world of Asiya, which is the lowest of all worlds, which is the world that we live in. And the Alter Rebbe says, so too is this level of concealment found in the world of Bria, which, yes, the world of Bria is the highest of all created worlds, but yet it's still totally concealed on the level of Ruach and Nefesh, which is the level, Ruach and Nefesh is the level of creations that are totally concealed and totally hide the creation within them. So, okay, so that's the end of the section. So it's a little bit cryptic, but the basic takeaway that we want to take away from here is that the Alter Rebbe is contrasting Torah with intellectually generated love and fear of God, whether we're talking about angels who have this love and fear of God or humans that have this intellectually generated love and fear of God. That as lofty as love and fear generated by an angel or by a human can be, it's still very much within the realm of, it's still subjective. Why? Because these things fall into the category of creations. These are things that are separate from God. On a simple level, the way that we can understand this is that there's God, and then if there's a person who's loving God, that automatically implies that there's a person and God, and they're two separate things. Versus when it comes to learning Torah, it's not the same thing. It's not like, oh, there's the Torah and then there's the person learning Torah. No, when we're learning Torah, we're actually tapping into God's wisdom itself in a way that's undiluted. It's not our own wisdom that we're learning. It's not like, we're not just like making up these ideas. We're actually learning godly wisdom, which is something which is beyond ourselves. So in conclusion, that's what the Greeks got wrong. The Greeks did not get that this Torah is unlike any other philosophy in the world. It's not just another religion or philosophy or something like that. It's divine wisdom. It's not human generated the way that that humans generate love and fear of God. This is something else. This is something that comes from outside of ourselves. And so when we tap into this learning, when we learn Torah in this way, we're tapping into something that's beyond ourselves. So we'll continue with this theme tomorrow as we continue along in this essay. So stay tuned and I will speak to you then. Thanks for listening to the It Is Taught podcast, hosted by Sarit Switzer. This podcast is dedicated in loving memory of my maternal grandfather, Avraham Yitzchak ben Binyamin HaKohen of blessed memory. Music by Shoshana. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the show, please share it with others and subscribe on YouTube, Apple iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to leave us a 5-star review. To find out more about the It Is Taught project, including more information on my soon-to-be published book, please visit our website, itistaught.com. To catch the latest from me, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Looking forward to speaking with you tomorrow, and until then, have a great day.